When we last left, Will, Dr. Smith, and the robot, wait, sorry, wrong Bill. So in the last chapter, chapter 7, I detailed how I had gone into what was for me the unexplored territory of wiring for the first time all of the various connections into the antenna controls automated function circuitry board, all of the navigation lights and the strobe lights and the warp sequencing system, and everything worked really great. I went through several lighting tests and wiring tests and had everything working perfectly. And then I attempted to take all of the static lighting, the LED strip lighting, and some static LEDs for the windows and a few of the spots, and connect them into the power system at the top of the power system before it went into here. And something happened. This LED, which is a color changing LED, which begins as amber, becomes brighter, and then turns blue, and it is what goes in the deflector dish housing, stopped working. It worked perfectly right up to the point that it didn't. And so I started to try to determine why. I assumed user error on my part, that perhaps the mistake was somehow in trying to bring in some different lighting elements. And I couldn't get it to work. I reached out to Ralph Tenaglia at Tenna Controls and had a few conversations, sent some emails back and forth, actually ordered another one of these light changing LEDs and wired that into everything. It didn't work either. So after a little bit more communication with him, I disengaged, disassembled the wiring, and boxed the Tenna Control circuitry board up and sent it back to Ralph and his team to determine why. They were awesome. They got on it, and what they determined was there was some type of break in the solder that made the connection specific to the command that went to the color changing function. So the light was getting a signal, and it was coming on as amber and actually ramping up, but it wasn't turning blue. They were able to repair it, get it back to me, and not exactly sure what caused that break in the solder. It may have been my mishandling of the piece, and perhaps I was a little bit too rough with it and broke it. Perhaps it was something else, and in the end it doesn't really matter. Ralph and his team were really fantastic in identifying it quickly and repairing it quickly and getting it back to me. So I'm happy to say that now that everything has been reconnected, that it's all working. We've got the navigation lights, the LEDs that are the navigation lights. We have two reds and two greens that are your port and your starboard navigation lights on the saucer. A few other navigation lights going around the saucer. We have the strobes, but best of all, the impulse drive warp drive sequence is back operating as it should be. First, this light comes on as amber, ramps up to a brighter amber, then changes to blue, which signifies that the engines are coming on. Then with another activation of the momentary switch, the impulse lights come on. Two of these will be in the back section of the impulse engine grills. One will be for the impulse crystal. Another activation. The impulse lights go out and the chiller grills come on, signifying that you're into warp. Throughout the whole thing, the deflector dish blue light stays on, and then with this activation, everything switches back off. I guess meaning the engines are off and the Enterprise is now in park mode. So I want to give a big shout out again to Ralph and his team for quickly identifying that, making that repair and getting it back to me. I'm very pleased that everything is back operating as it should be. And so now the next step, and I mentioned this in chapter 7, is going to be disconnect everything and start the process of placing these lights where they go throughout the ship. And so there's a little bit of logistics that will be involved. Two of these strobes are going to go way back here in the nacelles, which means there's going to have to be wiring design that'll come through the nacelles, down through the nacelle struts, through the secondary hull, up back through the dorsal, and into the saucer, because the circuitry board is going to be located somewhere in the saucer. There's also another strobe that is going to go here in the back, the top of the secondary hull, above the doors for the shuttle bay. And then there is one more that goes down below the Arboretum in the bottom of the secondary hull. So there'll be some a little bit of engineering, a little bit of design to try to figure out all that wiring and that sequence. And that's going to be the next step. But one more time, I wanted to go ahead and fire up this sequence again, because I love it so much, and this is really one of the main reasons that I undertook this second build, was to have this impulse drive, warp drive sequence in this color changing light. So I'm happy it's all back operational. And here we go. It is going to turn blue again. And again, your amber impulse lights, and another activation, and boom, you're in warp drive. So as we get into Chapter 8, we're going to be working on placing a lot of these lights throughout the different areas of the hull. Also get into finishing up the Arboretum and finishing up a lot of the paint detail on the top of the saucer, as well as paint detail along the bottom of the planetary sensor on the bottom of the saucer. So let's get started. Moving on from the wiring and lighting repair, and having reclaimed my primary workspace from the massive wires and LEDs and the tenant control circuitry board, I'm getting back to larger pieces, the saucer. And I've been painting these little gray squares that are the emergency lifeboats. There's these really cool multicolor decals that will go around each one. I haven't quite finished doing these. I've got about 5 or 6 left. What I've done, the way to facilitate this, is I made a mask that is, what I did was I took just a regular piece of printer paper and cut a square that was just a little bit larger than the size of one of those squares, and then made up the rest of the space with Tamiya masking tape, and then I would just put it down and hit it with a coat of Tamiya Haze Gray. Very pleased with the way that's come out. Then I've worked on some of the detail painting, again on the bridge dome, with this different coloration that I have used Tamiya plain blue. Now, one thing I thought I should mention is this is the Shapeways piece, which I've talked about a little bit, and very happy with the design of it, very happy with the design of the officer's lounge. But since the posting of Chapter 7, there's been a lot of news online and in modeling forums that Shapeways is no longer in business, or at least no longer taking orders and fabricating any of their pieces. I'm not sure if that's true or not. You can go online, you can see a lot of news items about that, but their website is still up, and it looks like you could still at least click things into a cart. I just haven't followed it through to see if you can finish up those orders. I have mixed feelings about Shapeways. These are really great pieces. the officer's lounge and the bridge dome, they are just so brittle and so fragile. In an earlier chapter, you saw how I had trouble with the back of this piece, shattered into 3 pieces. The first one of these I got as it was coming out of its packaging, it cracked in half. The top right corner of the officer's lounge had cracked off. Fortunately, it's a piece you haven't seen. And I've seen other modelers post that they've had trouble with the brittleness too. One modeler posted that he dropped a shapeways piece and it hit the floor and shattered to pieces. So again, I'm not sure whether they are still taking orders or whether those news items are correct that they are no longer in business. Also, another area that got the Tamiya blue is this section on the back of the saucer. Right here, there's some fine detail I did around here and this. I'm very happy with the way this spade-like piece came out. Masked it, used that Tamiya blue, it came out perfect. This little band, not so much, and I'm going back and doing a little bit of fine detail work with paintbrushes. I'm not quite finished with that, but I am very happy with the color. And now return to work on the secondary hull, both the interior and the exterior. For the exterior, I did a fine bead of the Vallejo plastic putty here on the photo etch windows for the Arboretum. And I like the Vallejo plastic putty because this nozzle has a really fine line, so you can lay in fine beads, which I did. Would do a bead and fine sanding and a bead and fine sanding until I got a really nice look. And then also did some fine beads and some sanding here along this seam to take up the gap, and also hopefully will mitigate light leaks coming from the interior. And then did some fine dusting of the Tamiya fine white primer, followed up between coats with fine sanding with fine grit sandpaper, and then a final coat. And then once I get done with the exterior work, laying down the strong back and the nacelle struts, which is a whole operation in and of itself and will probably take up a good half a chapter, we'll come back in with the final coating of the fine white primer and then a dusting of the Tamiya pearl gloss. So I also went down deep into the bottom of the secondary hull to lay the first of the tenna controls, blinking strobe lights, one just like this, and these lights have this really long resistor, and I'll show you in just a sec how once the light is placed in the bottom of the hole that the leads and the resistors are so long that the Arboretum would never fit. So the first thing I did was took 2 needle nose pliers and very carefully, gripping one right here and one right here, folded that lead. Then to get into, and then I also took a Dremel 7/64 bit and went into the hole that's in the bottom right here. Because that hole wasn't quite big enough for that LED lens, bulb lens, excuse me. And then deep in here is where the bulb went and went into the hole, and then here are those resistors like I talked about. And I also, to have a solid place for the wires to run, drilled out pilot holes in this bulkhead and ran the wires, the positive and the negative. And so you may be wondering, what this chewing gum looking stuff is, and I'll get to that in just a second. But Here is that LED lit up, and of course when it is wired back into the Tenant Controls circuitry board, it will be a blinking strobe light. So the next step is placing blue LEDs in the back of the secondary hull at the very rear of the hull. There's one here at the very end and at the top, and there's also one on the other side that will be the lighting for the tractor beam emitters. I'm going to try to reproduce a little bit of what that is going to look like. Fantail is temporarily put in place, and so we'll switch on those two blue LEDs, and there are clear plastic parts, clear plastic stock parts that will go in each of these windows. There's HDA ModelWorks masks, so that when they're masked off, you end up with 3 horizontal lines, 3 horizontal bars that will be what the tractor beam emitter lights will come out through right here. And then to get back to mounting technique that I have found that has been very effective is this product, which is mounting putty like you would use posters in your dorm room walls and in other places. I like the Gorilla Grip. It's really easy to use. I use this a lot in my Jupiter 2 build, and again in my first 350 refit build. There's a lot of places, a lot of applications, of course, where hot glue works very well. But in some areas, hot glue just doesn't work because it's difficult to get the gun down, the gun nozzle down where you need it. Also, a hot gun can be a little bit messy and cumbersome, and then of course you have to wait for everything to heat up. With the mounting putty, you just roll out a little ball and smash it into place. Doesn't have to heat up, it goes in cold, and it stays put. And you can use a little ball or a big ball, however much you need. I also use it not only to hold down the lights, but sometimes as wiring guides to hold the wires. Again, I use it in a lot of different places, such as right here in secondary hull in my first build, as well as putting down the LED spots at the front end of the nacelles in my first build. It's been a year and a half in those, in that kit, and haven't had a problem. So it's a product I highly recommend. It makes a lot of this quite easy to use. Now I want to take a look at the finished up Arboretum. I'm ready to call the Arboretum done. I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. I know a lot of people do a lot of detail work down here in the pond and the stream, the little waterfall, and do some fake rocks or fake gravel along in this path. This is another area, it's sort of like the shuttle bay, in that you really don't see the bottom of this piece too well when you're looking through the Arboretum windows on the lower portions of the secondary hull. So I didn't put a whole lot of time into trying to replicate that. I did use some fake grass, some railroad turf. I think they add a nice texture along in here. And then I built little trees and little bushes. And what I did was, the stock kit parts have these little mushroom looking things that I know a lot of builders have made fun of, and I do too. These things right here, and they're little trees, and yeah, and they are really kind of bullshitty. There's not a lot of detail on them. It's just they're more of a mushroom than a tree. But the way I've used them is that I would cover them in Elmer's white glue, and then roll them. Once again, model train foliage. This is late fall foliage. This is regular green, and made these little trees, and in some cases, little bushes, little shrubbery here. There, and then the paragraphics photo etch piece with the HDA ModelWorks decal that is the wall on either side and has little corridors and little doors and things. There's also a great little window here that has the Starfleet insignia, and I drilled out holes behind those, and hopefully I'm going to have some nice ambient light that'll come through those and light those up. Again, I think you will be able to see that when you look through the windows. And then I also put in some little crew members. There's this adorable little couple right here holding hands, and what could be more romantic than standing in the Arboretum in the garden and gazing out the windows at the stars going by. So isn't that just as adorable as it can be? And I've got a little crew member here coming out of the door waving at people, another little crew member here, and then a few more on the other side that will face that other window. I'm not really quite sure how visible they're going to be, but we'll see once it all goes into place. Now I'm going to move down to the bottom of the saucer to do a little needed work on the lower planetary sensor array. This piece here, the sensor array, has these mounting pins here, 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 and here that really get in the way of lighting when you put some lighting down in this portion of the sensor array to shoot out through these window areas. These mounting pins get in the way. So what you have to do is to slice them off, which is what I did on the first build, and then thought I could just eyeball this piece back where it was supposed to go, and found it was a little more challenging than I had initially thought it would be. So for this time, what I'm going to do is make some guidelines just by taking a hobby knife and scribing a little etch here, 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 and here, so that when we take it back up, the marks will be easy to hide over when it's permanently glued down, but will be a good guide for putting it down. So now I'm going to take the Dremel and slice these off, and I want to be honest, don't really know why, but this is one of my least favorite parts of the build, and I'm not quite sure why. It's not very difficult. It's pretty easy to go together, but it's just, a part that, like everything else with this kit, takes a lot of work, and for some reason it's just kind of one of my least favorite parts. But now, having said that, I'm going to fire up the Dremel and slice off those pins. I use this circular saw bit on the Dremel to shear away the 4 pins, the 4 mounting pins. Before I did that, I did a little light leak test and held this piece up to light and saw that I had some ghosting coming through at the base of the pins, and also down through the holes in the center of the pins. So I put a bead of the tulip fabric paint around there to help further that light block. I'm also going to put a spot on the end of each one of these to make sure there's no light coming through those points. But now that the pins are gone and I have my guide marks, I can eyeball where this is going to go once I get the lights mounted and wired. There are clear parts that go in each of these windows, and once again HDA Model Works masks that you mask them over and you paint them black, pull the masks off, and they're little teeny rectangular ports which will allow single spot beams to come out for these portions of the saucer. So I think that this is a good spot to wrap up Chapter 8, and we'll see everybody as we do more large-scale body work when we get into Chapter 9.